for joining me for this new series of Tune Into Tourism, all focused on sustainability. Now, today's episode is all about two words we've heard an awful lot of recently, and that is net zero. Net zero means not adding to the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and to achieve that we have to reduce emissions as much as possible and balance out any that remain by removing an equivalent amount. My first guest, Neil Ross Russell, is Managing Director of Net Zero Now, a nationwide initiative that aims to help 99% of SMEs to plan for and create targets to achieve net zero. I started by asking him what the imperative was and why now was the time for net zero.
Well, I think that the climate imperative, I think, is there for all to see. I mean, the evidence is pretty unequivocal now that we are on a very, very worrying path in terms of global warming, and we need urgency and we need action now. But I think there's also a very real commercial reason for SMEs in particular, in that we can see whether it's on the front page of the newspaper, we can see the desire that exists out there, the demand that exists out there for people to be buying from, working for, investing in climate sensitive businesses, and net zero is the sort of scientific conclusion to that. It's this great distillation of this complicated climate science down into two simple words that really captured the imagination of everybody, from the politicians through the media to the consumers. So getting to net zero is yes, it's ultimately a scientific ambition and our best chance of managing the global warming situation we find ourselves in, but it's also this movement, it's also this sort of this banner that we can all rally behind, because it's a beautiful simplification of such a complicated area.
So obviously within tourism, there are lots of different types of businesses that will have different concerns, whether that's an accommodation provider, tour guide, a visitor attraction, and so on. But are there any overarching principles which apply to all tourism businesses?
Yeah, there are overarching principles that apply to all businesses. And if you were to have a sleepless night one night and you wanted to read the GHG protocol, you would see that in there they define our emissions for every business under three scopes. So there is scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Scopes 1 and 2 really just deal with the operations of your business, and so that tends to be around the electricity that you use, the travel that you're involved in, the paper that you're using, the waste, things like that, the emissions from your day-to-day operations. And of course, there's lots and lots of initiatives that people can sign up to right now that will help reduce those emissions, and perhaps the most obvious and very often the most powerful of those is just to switch to a renewable energy supplier. It's something that's available to pretty much, I'm pretty sure it's a pretty much 100% coverage in the UK that everybody is able to access a renewable energy tariff. If we all did that, that would be an enormous step in the right direction that everybody can make and applies across the board.
So tell me about some of the tourism businesses or hospitality businesses in particular that you've been working with, and the sorts of things that you've helped them to do.
So I can't name names at this point because, I mean, everybody's on a journey at the moment, and this is a journey. Getting to net zero is not a one-off exercise. It's something that we need to keep going and keep pushing on and getting there over time. But what we're able to do, because we're measuring their footprint and helping them really drill down into understand both the source of their emissions as well as the scale of their emissions, then we're really able to zero in on the kind of hotspots. Where are their emissions coming from? And the truth is that for most food service businesses, for example, about 70 to 80% of their emissions will come from what I call as scope 3. So they're bought goods and services, and for a food service business, that tends to be obviously the food and the drink that they're buying in order to serve up. So about 70-80% comes from scope 3. About 70-80% of that comes from the food part. A large part of that, about 78%, comes from meat, and most of the meat comes from beef. Beef is the big sort of emitter in the mix when it comes to food service. So very, very small changes can make an enormous difference. If you were to reduce the amount of beef in the menu for a shepherd's pie, for example, by 10%, that can have an enormous impact without really impacting the quality of the food that you're delivering at the other end. We should all and can all be encouraging our the farmers and the people, other people in the supply chain to do their own footprinting so that we can really get a better understanding of how local beef is better for the environment than beef that's just shipped around even just around the UK. So encouraging regenerative farming practices, encouraging everybody in the supply chain to really understand their emissions, and so we can get a better and more granular calculation. All these things are important. But in terms of the sort of day-to-day stuff, we're also very much encouraging people to have a conversation about this, so we are able to provide our clients with a full breakdown of their menu, so to identify the specific climate impact of every item on the menu. And some people are talking about turning that into a voluntary climate charge. Some people just wanted to use it to start a conversation. And I think that's the latter is the most important of those. Because if you and I were going out to dinner and we could really see the difference between the big steak and bottle of red wine I'd be ordering, and the nice green salad that you might be ordering, we can see the climate impact of those. Doesn't necessarily change the what we would order, but it does mean we can start that conversation, because we can really understand the impact of our choices and then start to make less impactful choices going forward.
Yeah, I think it's about educating, isn't it, people to be making better choices. It's certainly something we've seen on menus with calories, and for people to understand the impact on their own bodies of what they're eating.
Funny you should mention calories, only because I was talking to a restaurateur recently, and they are having to put calories on there. Their concern is there's going to be an awful lot of information taking up space on their menu. So we need to find a way of you're absolutely right, it's about education, but how can we do this education in a way that is not preaching, it's informative, it's educational, but it's also engaging, and so we're looking at all sorts of ways we can deliver that message through to the consumer without feeling like we're preaching to them and making them feel bad about their choices.
Mm-hmm. It does seem like there's a lot to think about. I mean, it's important that we do that, and it's sort of essential that we do that now. But how much of an undertaking are we talking about in terms of how difficult it is and how time consuming it is to take a look at your business and work out exactly where you're having an impact and where there might be opportunities to cut down on your emissions?
It's difficult. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat the pill. You do need to find information from a variety of different sources. My analogy is, or if you remember, if you ever run your own business 10 years ago, and when you had to do your VAT returns, you were digging out invoices from the back of drawers and from email attachments. That's the sort of stage we're at. We're very keen not to let the pursuit of perfection get in the way of progress. So there are ways that you can do this on an aggregated basis, so you don't have to report the exact number of tomatoes that you've bought in the year. But the more data you can provide, the better outcome we can deliver you. And so going forward, we would urge people to start retaining those receipts, making sure you've got those invoices and you've got that data that you can put in, so that going forward your data is as accurate as possible. But the most important thing is to just start on the journey, and we'll all improve as we get there.
What about the expense of it all? Is it something that's going to require significant outlay?
It's really not. I mean, I probably would say that, wouldn't I? But no, we don't think it's expensive at all. I mean, our prices, and for full disclosure, there's lots of other service providers are available, but our prices start at £40 per month for an individual pub or restaurant, and obviously, if you're a chain of restaurants, then there are discounts available for multiple sites. So we think it's very achievable in terms of a price point. And what you get for that money is you get the ability to measure your footprint, you get a sort of a protocol compliant reduction plan, you get access to our offset products, which assures that any investments you're making in compensating for your unavoidable emissions are done so in compliance with all the various different global guidelines. And then ultimately you get the certification, and you're absolutely right to say that there are commercial benefits to it. I mean, you just need, again, to go back to those newspaper headlines and see the number of people marching through the streets in Glasgow a few weeks ago to know that there is a consumer demand out there, and there are very few people right now who are meeting that consumer demand, and the businesses that go first are the ones that are going to get the benefit from really taking advantage of that demand from both from customers and from employees and even investors to work with and buy from and invest in net zero businesses.
So you mentioned offsetting there, Neil. Are we moving away a little bit from offsetting and trying to aim more for a decarbonisation of our industry?
The scientific consensus rather, is that net zero is the best chance we've had. Now net means net. Net involves offsets. So the question is not really about what are offsets the right thing. The question is, at what point should we start offsetting our emissions? At what point, should we stop reducing and start offsetting? And the answer to that is never. We should always be striving to reduce as much as possible. There are a number of ways we can do that very quickly, like switching to a renewable energy plan or tariff. There are, however, also a number of things that are technically or feasible, but out of reach for an SME. So an individual restaurant or pub, for example, is not able to impact the distribution network that it's getting its drinks from. You're not able to force your distributor to move to a fully electric fleet, for example. So that's something you can't do. So that would go into the bucket of unavoidable emissions. And at the point it's unavoidable, then it's much better to be offsetting that and investing in initiatives which will either avoid somebody else putting the carbon into the atmosphere or actually removing the carbon atmosphere. It's got to be a good thing to be doing, as opposed to sitting there going, well, I can't yet reduce those emissions, so I'm just going to sit and wait and do nothing.
So just before we let you go, Neil, what would be the main benefits that you would sell to businesses to encourage them to take action now?
There is an opportunity out there right now. This demand exists right now for people to, I've said it 3 or 4 times, for people to be buying from, working for, investing in net zero businesses. It's going to take a while for every business to get there, and there will be some winners and there will be some people who only come when the legislation forces them to do so. That legislation is going to arrive. We can't become a net zero economy as the government is committed to in law, to become a net zero economy by 2050. That is going to require legislation. So you have a choice, essentially, of either doing this early and being one of those early adopters who takes advantage of that demand and can meet that demand in a way that others can't, or you're going to do it late, in which case it's all about the stick rather than the carrot, and you're going to be doing it simply because you have to do it to avoid the taxes. So it's your choice. It's something it's a bullet you're going to have to bite at some point. My advice would be to do it early and do it because of the carrot of that demand that's there from the customers and from your employees. But if you don't do it early, you're going to have to do it late, and then you're going to be running away from the stick of legislation and taxation.
Absolutely. Well, do it now whilst there's still an opportunity there to capitalise on it. Absolutely. Well, Neil, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem at all. Thanks for your time.
Throughout this series, we're sharing stories from other tourism businesses who are becoming more sustainable. In this episode, I went to Usebi Restaurant and Deli in Glasgow, and I met their owner, Giovanna, who told me about an initiative that they took part in, which has helped reduce their carbon impact as well as help them to save money.
I am Giovanna Usebi. This is Usebi's Deli and Restaurant in Glasgow's West End. The impact of food waste on climate change, people don't realise that food waste is actually a bigger problem than plastics and costs each individual restaurant almost £10,000 a year in profit in food that we lose by not looking after it. So Plate Up for Glasgow was an initiative from Circular Glasgow and the Glasgow Chambers of Commerce. It was to highlight food waste in the hospitality industry, and it involved 40 restaurants coming together throughout the city to create one low waste dish on their menu. We came up with one low waste dish that we put on our menu. It was called the Humble Cauliflower, and it actually still features on our menu. It is a completely zero waste dish using the whole cauliflower.
Humble cauliflower salad. Dish has been massively popular since the COP26. We start off by using our pesto that we've made from the cauliflower stems. We've just fried them, just till they get crisp. And that is our garnish, right at the very top. So it's got a great visual and great flavour. Voila!
The Plate Up for Glasgow initiative lasted for 1 month. It ran through COP26. We thought that was a great time to have it. We presented the dish on our main menu. We looked at our sales at the end of the month-long period, and it turned out it was the best-selling dish in our menu. So it does show that the consumer, if they have the choice, they really want to always vote for sustainability. So I think it's really made us rethink how we do things in a restaurant. I mean, food waste has really been at the heart of what we do. Our restaurant is based in the cucina povera values of my Southern Italian grandparents, but it really got the team engaged. And since then, they have all been coming to me with various ideas. You know, Giovanna, there's a coffee company who can take our grains and make it into clothes dye. Maybe we could get our uniforms dyed and it would close the circle for us. So they're all rethinking about the loop, how we can close the circle in the restaurant, how we can do better, because we can always do better. We're not the finished article. This is an ongoing journey. Sustainability is hugely important for all of our businesses. It's not just about the climate, which is so important, but it's also about staying ahead. It's also about, Plate Up for Glasgow is about plating up for profit as well. If we're looking at it as a business and coming through the pandemic, we really have to rethink how we do business. Throughout the city, the general feedback was that the chefs really enjoy creating these dishes. Front of house were proud to talk about these dishes and the impact that they could have on climate change, and taking a positive initiative and a positive role in that. It really turned out to be a really successful dish for us at the restaurant. I think there's been a cultural change as a result of not just Plate Up for Glasgow, but the pandemic as well. You can see there's been huge pressures on our supply chains now, and we've really had to rethink our menus. So we are sourcing more locally, telling that Scottish story, but we're weaving that through our Italian story in our menu. For example, we're buying venison, but making venison ragu. If anything, the pandemic has shown us it's about local economy, keeping the money within our local economy and keeping the business within our local economies as well. So I think there's been a cultural shift within our kitchen. The team are really fired up after the Plate Up for Glasgow initiative. It made us really rethink our kitchen space. We're looking at putting in some new equipment. We currently cook with induction, but it's more energy saving equipment. And also we're looking at scales that will be able to measure in real time the food that's going into our bins and tell us what that food is. So in real time, we can find out if portion sizes are too big, if we're maybe over ordering on a certain item. So we're really looking at not just, the food on the customer's plate, but the food that's coming back and what we're doing with that food, how much are we putting in that bin. I think everything in a kitchen should start from the bin and work its way back. So that's how we're re-looking at everything within our own business. I really feel it's worth investment because the payback in terms of what we can say to the customer, the journey that we're on, this is where we're at. We're doing better with it. We are thinking about the environment.
Inspiring and delicious stuff from Giovanna there. And of course, all the links and all the organisations that are mentioned in today's episode you can find by just looking in the description box or by checking out our webpage hie.co.uk/Tinto. Now, to find out more about how tourism businesses can play their part in becoming net zero, I spoke to Dr. Suzanne Etty. She's an environmental impact specialist at Intrepid Travel. They're a responsible travel provider who've been taking customers across the globe for over 30 years and who have been carbon neutral since 2010. Now, I started by addressing the elephant in the room and asked her, can we really achieve net zero and still fly?
No, and it's definitely the big elephant in the room as we make people fly, and we all need in the end to really do our part and to help protect our planet. But obviously many of us are suffering from wanderlust and really want to kind of start traveling again. But then, as you said, it can be pretty daunting how to address it. And that, of course, also depends on where travelers are coming from. For example, if they actually need to fly to Scotland. If I fly into London, can I take ground transport, meaning train to get up to my destination? But it's also around staying longer and thinking about the flight itself. Can we educate customers around choosing economy over business class, fly direct as possible, for example? And really make a flight count, like the trip is not just for a few days, but really stay and embrace and really enjoy the destination. But it's also, I think, the other opportunity for destination is around the product, really kind of looking in kind of promoting longer trips, like the minimum 10 days. And if there are any internal flights, to really where can we remove those and move over to trains. But also secondly, working really with England to kind of promote Scotland as that alternative, as a domestic product that can be reached by train, and that really speaks to that kind of movement to minimize flights, to not to fly in order to get to your holiday destination. I think there's actually huge opportunity for Scotland to take that position.
But net zero does seem like a somewhat intangible goal for businesses, and the UK net zero target is for 2050, although quite a lot of people would say that's not quite soon enough. But how do you start? How are tourism businesses in Scotland supposed to start with trying to help play their part in working towards that goal? What's the first steps for them to take?
I guess the first step I would really recommend for anyone who is listening to this episode to actually look at the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action, because that was launched actually during the COP26 in Glasgow on the 4th of November. And it is really the boldest move ever for our industry towards climate accountability. And it is a one-page pledge, and signatories basically commit to halving emissions by 50% by 2030, and then working towards reaching the net zero by 2050, because the first 50% are the easy part, and I shared already a couple of examples. Move to renewable energy is a really good first step to reduce your emissions. But what is really important is that this declaration is based on the framework created by Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency that I alerted to earlier. But also by signing up, you're also becoming part of a network. And that's really what I think is really important, especially for SMEs that might find this really daunting, like signing up to something, committing to halving emissions, understanding how do I even start to develop a climate action plan like that is talking about measurement, decarbonization, regeneration, and collaboration. But the important part is that Tourism Declares is now the climate action program of the Travel Foundation, which is one of the partners behind the Glasgow Declaration. And we really want to help tourism organizations, that includes those SMEs, to actually deliver on their plans. And so that community of practice will really provide these learning opportunities. It's about accelerating learning, engaging with others, because I'm a firm believer that walking together, we actually will get there a lot faster than walking alone.
What does decarbonising really mean then for tourism businesses in Scotland?
That's a good question. So decarbonising means really, so once you measure, you actually understand your carbon footprint. So you then can, for example, as a business, you might actually see, if you just look at your emissions from your office, you looked at your gas, electricity, your water, your print, your business travel, and suddenly you realize out of all those activities, actually, maybe print is a really big part of it, because you're producing brochures, as in hard copy brochures that you're handing out. You might also discover, oh, actually, our business travel, maybe pre-COVID, was actually pretty high, or a big part of our foot, maybe 30%, just to take a random number. But then you can think about, so if I want to reduce my carbon footprint, so where are my hotspots? So maybe it's print, maybe it's business travel. So then you can start putting a plan in place to kind of to reduce those emissions. So one way could be, for example, to go completely digital. So maybe you're not printing brochures anymore, but you're moving to a digital solution and you're sharing that information with your customers. Or for example, with business travel, maybe we're taking learnings from the pandemic and saying, okay, maybe meetings under 1 or 2 hours need always to happen by Zoom. If I don't stay for 2-3 days, then again, we will be actually switching more to Zoom conversations. Or if it's a meeting in London, we're definitely traveling by train. We're not taking an internal flight. And all these initiatives will then really kind of start to reduce your overall carbon footprint. Because, for example, train travel, especially in Europe, is often carries only a third of the carbon footprint in comparison to a flight. So it does actually will make a huge difference to the carbon footprint of a company to take just these kind of few examples of initiatives.
So in terms of the resources out there and the first places to look, have you got any suggestions over where businesses could go initially to try and take advantage of some of these shared documents, templates, information, that sort of thing?
I would really encourage you visit our carbon management page on the Intrepid Travel website. So last year we published, or I authored, a 10-step guide how to decarbonize your business, and that really touches on the many points that I shared today with you, and it's free, available on our website. And then also, as I mentioned during COP26, we launched our 25-page decarbonization guide, which really covers the measurement part, but also kind of how to set an emission reduction target. Like the 10-step guide, this guide is also freely available on our website. So I really encourage you to kind of download those documents, especially the 10-step guide, if you're really at the start of the journey.
Absolutely. And as well as doing the right thing, it makes good business sense, doesn't it? I mean, Intrepid has had great success by following this approach.
Yep, absolutely agree with you. I think whether you're considering is there a business case for taking climate action, absolutely. I think we know we're at that tipping point for climate action, and we need to act really on this. And if you're thinking kind of, what is my business case? What about the cause? I guess there's three main points really to remember. One is it builds positive reputation over a sustained period, and it's really appealing to customers because more customers are looking for more sustainable travel options, whether it's from accommodations or tour operators. It presents definitely a new revenue growth and can also have cost reduction opportunities, but also having strong ESG principle really attracts and retains talents. As we know, millennials do want to work for more sustainable companies.
That's great stuff. Well, listen, thank you so much, Dr. Suzanne Etty, for joining us today, all the way from Melbourne, but we did it in a sustainable way. You didn't have to travel anywhere. Lots of food for thought on achieving net zero from our guest Neil Ross Russell from Net Zero Now and Dr. Suzanne Etty from Intrepid Travel. And of course, ideas for reducing food waste from Giovanna Eusebi. Thanks for watching today. I've been Julia Sutherland, and you can find out more information and all the links mentioned today by visiting our webpage, hie.co.uk/Tinto.